So I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second day of the Regional Policy Dialogue on Environmental Sustainability in Latin America. For those of you who may be first time joining us, I would just like to note that we already had two regional policy dialogues organized in the past. One which was, the first dialogue was focused on environmental priorities in Latin America, and we chose to focus climate change and biodiversity. And then this is why we are having now these regional dialogues focusing on climate change. And then the second regional policy dialogue focused on climate change mitigation and technology transfer and financing, specifically on those topics. And now this third dialogue is focusing on climate change adaptation. My name is Eija Kiskinen. I am the senior global relations advisor in the Environment Directorate at the OECD. And I'm managing this Latin America project. So today we will cover thematic approaches to climate change adaptation. So we will specifically discuss how to address climate change adaptation at the local level, and what are the biodiversity and nature-based solutions that can foster climate change adaptation in Latin America and Caribbean. And I would like to invite Jose Antonio Ardavin, head of Latin America and the Caribbean division from the OECD Global Relations and Cooperation Directorate, to moderate this first session today. So Jose Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eija, and thank you, welcome everybody. Aprovechando la traducción, hablaré en español.
I'm going to make use of the interpretation services, and I will address you in Spanish. I want to welcome you and give you a warm greeting. Yesterday, I was unable to attend the dialogue, but I was told that it was very interesting day, and hopefully today will be too. I am head of the Latin American and the Caribbean division of the OCDE Global Relations and Cooperation Directorate. We are an OECD body focused on development, and it is in this context that we are organizing the ministerial meeting for next October. Costa Rica is going to tell us about this meeting. We've been working on this third dialogue and the prior two dialogues that have been completing the image of what's going on in the region. And today, our panel is a very important one, in my opinion, because adaptation to climate change at a local level is essential. Climate change is a global phenomenon, as we well know. Yesterday, a lot was said about tipping points and the global aspects. But at the end of the day, it has local impacts with concrete realities affecting specific people. And we can give examples. I read, for example, that rainfall in January 2018 caused losses of over $2 billion in Uruguay and Argentina. And in El Chaco, Argentina, half of the capital city was flooded with hundreds of people evacuated. So these are very specific realities. And the mega drought in Chile in the year 2019, affecting 7 regions from the Atacama Desert to the Ñuble region in the center of the country. The hardest drought in the last years, but it could be forecasted due to trends in the previous years, and it has completely changed the lives of people who used to breed, stock, and live from agriculture. That dry corridor in Central America, where 90% of the Central American population is living, is becoming drier and drier, and one cause of migration from this region. Once again, this relates to opportunities offered by this land where people used to live from agriculture and stock breeding. These are rural communities. These are concrete realities that can be found throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. We've heard about that with hurricanes, very serious hurricanes that have been affecting the Caribbean for years. So adaptation is a global policy. It is national policy, but at the end of the day, it has very specific local realities, and it leads to very diverse policies that depend on the region. But I believe that policy solutions start at the local level. 8 cities in Latin America are part of the Sustainable Mobility Ranking at the Urban Mobility Index from 2022. To have They are at about 30 or 40 40th place with like Mexico, Sao Paulo, or Buenos Aires. And subnational actions are very important. Many cities are implementing innovative solutions. So we must keep working to make our societies more resilient, and the so-called green jobs will be created at the local level for very specific and concrete realities with very specific local regulations. I believe that we must focus on the regional realities, local realities. And next week, I'm talking about green jobs because our colleagues from the SMEs Region Cities Development Group of OECD is going to present a report regarding the creation of green jobs, which will be very important and part of the discussion of the ministerial meeting. We will put the link in the chat so that you can participate in the presentation of the report. So today we're going to talk about policies and measures locally adapted, focused on climate change. This will also give us a chance to discuss different items about resources and financing, both at the local level. So now I invite Luis Echi, policy analyst of the Latin American and Caribbean unit at the OECD Development Center. You know that the economical outlook this year from OECD is focusing on fair green transition, and Luis, please open the panel and set the scene, and then we'll go to our panel members. Thank you, Jose Antonio, and thank you, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I will continue speaking in Spanish. Jose Antonio's opening remarks are quite on the spot, and they are bringing to the table topics that are really appropriate to begin today's discussion. I am coordinator of the Economic Outlook for Latin America report. If you don't know what this report is about, let me tell you that this is a yearly report developed jointly with ECLAC, the European Union, and CAP, working with different directorates of OECD. And for this edition, specifically, we were working with the Environment Directorate. We worked hand in hand with them in developing this report, and many topics that I will mention are the result of our collaboration with them. This is a flagship report for the region. Every year we focus on a different topic. 2022, we focused on green fair transition and how to move forward with transition, but the environmental issues will remain part of our work, always as a cross-cutting topic, bringing everything together. This is the 15th report, and with it, we wanted to frame under a single report a comprehensive view of the different sides of this topic in the region. We wanted to bring it together and look at it from the perspective of the needs and starting point for the region. As Jose Antonio said, yesterday's sessions set the scene talking about the specific measures and specific issues and financing, and now a challenge is how to implement these policies on the ground. And our report states that cities and local governments play an essential role to make this possible, not just because of their proximity, not just because they are closer to the people, but that is where people produce, where people consume, and where we are having the issue of emissions, and this is where we face the challenge of developing these urban environments for consequences. Another couple of comments about the report. This report is multidimensional, focused on development. We look at the environmental side, which cannot be dissociated with the productive and social aspects. And therefore, we must look at the environmental issues comprehensively. And this report also talks about things that are still way ahead of many agendas. It's looking out to the future, and it talks about policies and addressing policies systemically. And before I remark how important it is to have a systemic approach, I want to ask why adaptation is a priority for the region. As we know, this region is one of the most vulnerable to consequences of climate change. Extreme climate events increased by 60% in the last 2 decades, affecting multiple sectors, mainly the agricultural sector, affecting citizens, and affecting public infrastructure. So we are talking about 3 issues. It affects citizens, it affects the regions, it affects also the region. That region is becoming indebted due to infrastructure and socio-economical issues. So policies and investments must look into the future. They must have a long-term vision. Central America and the Caribbean are the most vulnerable sub-regions. And the most vulnerable groups, socioeconomically speaking, are suffering the most and are the least prepared to face this situation. So mitigation, adaptation, resilience, adaptability are concepts that must be seen and considered together as a group. And that's why it is essential to have a systemic view for sustainable regional development and also at a national level. So we see that urban population has doubled since the 50s. South America is one of the most urbanized areas in the world, even over higher income countries. And we see an urban infrastructure that privileges private transportation. We have 3 vicious circles that need to be brought down, and a systemic view can help us. For example, let's take transportation. Transportation is a sector that may not be as associated to adaptation as others, but I would like here to talk about the link. So let's take transportation. And let's consider issues that have been lagging due to induced demand. This is we have this issue like traffic, traffic jams. So the solution is more infrastructure, more public transportation routes, more freeways. But shortly, after a few time, this infrastructure stops working when there is an increase in the number of vehicles, and then the problem is bigger. And urban development without planning and the erosion of public transportation and its quality and other issues lead to problems with the public transportation systems like we see today in different Latin American cities. So looking and trying to solve these problems by focusing only on small parts of the system and trying to solve this issue by developing small results, it's not working. So it is fundamental to develop something that is more comprehensive and that is looking into the future and going from using the urban space with private solutions and going into public solutions with transportation and investment in infrastructure is essential to prepare urban systems to face the consequences of climate change, increasing the adaptation capacity. For example, in coastal cities where 27% of the population is living in coastal areas. So the point goes beyond transportation. I only use transportation as a specific example. What I'm trying to say is that this long-term vision can help with adaptation in many different sectors. This can include sustainable agriculture, tourism, nature-based solutions, water management, coastal areas protection, just to mention a few. So finally, I would like to talk about some adaptation challenges at the local level. On the one hand, there is a need for financing, as Juan Antonio was saying, between 2019 and 2020, most financing has been focused on mitigation policies, and only 1/6 of the investments in adaptation comes from the budget for mitigation. A second point is how to apply national adaptation plans at a local level and how to follow up on these implementations. And then we see that we don't have enough data. We need to develop reliable indicators, and the results should be shared with other countries so regional and international indicators can be developed. We also face a challenge. We have to ensure consistency between the short, medium, and long-term solutions and consistency between mitigation and adaptation, and develop a capacity building at the local level, because sometimes at the local level they don't have the people they need or the capacities that they need. This is another need countries have expressed, and this is happening more so at the local level. So it is important to design and implement early warning systems. It is important to strengthen information and information sharing capacities. It is necessary to work on sustainable practices among citizens, make information accessible, and there are many examples in the report, Leo. I'm not going to go in detail on all those examples. You can read it later, but there are examples about sustainable agriculture and stock breeding. There are examples from Costa Rica and Brazil. We have examples of data generated by observatories. We have examples of nature-based solutions from Costa Rica and Mexico and Colombia, and bioeconomy and the food sector. and many other things that are core for adaptation in the region. And finally, I want to mention this other document, which is widely used in the region. This one deals with protected areas and has had a positive impact in the preservation of biodiversity and encouraging ecosystem-based adaptation. The region has the largest protected biodiversity area in the whole world because it holds most of the biodiversity in the world, but the region has worked to increase the protected surface. 25% of the surface in the region is protected, 24% of the sea surface is also protected in the region, and this is above other OECD's levels. I will stop here, but because I believe that the panel is a very interesting one, and we will delve further into these topics. Luis, thank you very much for your introduction. You are right. This is setting the scene for the discussion. Now we are going to hold a discussion with some of the stakeholders living in the region, working in these realities. I want to welcome Mr. Claudio Castro Salas, Mayor of the city of Renca in Chile, and then Astrid Michels, coordinator of GIZ programs, and Amy Radetzky, Director of Economic Policies and Summit Coordination of the Department of State of the United States. I give the floor to Mr. Claudio Castro Salas, Mayor of Renca, Chile, who is probably living this reality. Mr. Mayor, please tell us about your perspective of adaptation policies that you've been implementing to face these challenges in your city. Thank you very much, Jose Antonio. Good afternoon to everyone. I am part of the champion mayors at OECD. I am working in the steering board, and we have identified that we want to strengthen the action of mayors throughout Latin America. This dialogue goes hand in hand with the objectives of our group. If you could help me go to the next slide. I am in Renca. Renca is one of 36 communes in Santiago of Chile in the northwest, highly vulnerable place in our city. Multidimensional poverty index are 25%, almost 4 points above the city of Santiago. The geographical characteristics of our site makes us a heat island, which means that it's colder in the winter, hotter in the summer. Like Jose Antonio said, we just lived through an important overheating wave with the hottest summer recorded in our history and in our lives, and that was very hard in Renca. As a consequence, we have the highest levels of pollution in the city. All the pollution, all the smog, it reaches our region, it concentrates here, and it influences the region, making it the hotter part, a heat island. And this vulnerability is very much related with vulnerability. We have less access to green areas than other countries. We have access, our access is less than half as in other areas of Santiago, which also affects our preparation for climate change. It is true that we are in the pericenter of the city of Santiago. We have a lot of industry. Renca is home to a thermoelectric plant, and we have an impact from the emissions generated by this plant. And we also have many factories, like, for example, beverages plants. They use a lot of water, and that affects us. And we have this drought that it's coming from the north of Chile. It's already reached the area where Santiago is placed, and therefore it is evident that we are living this reality of climate change. And we must also remember that Renca is also a hilly area. If you can see my background, there is a Renca mound, and we are also detecting the loss of soil in all the mountains around Renca, as has been detected, which compounds the problem even more. So we have been talking with other cities and other communes in Chile and with other cities in the rest of Latin America. Go to the next slide, please. And next slide, please. So yes, thank you. So as I was saying, with them, we get together and we do a lot of things, and municipalities are experts in looking and keeping count of all the projects and activities. And in the last year, we have learned how to measure, and that is an important change. We are working with many cities, and we've been measuring, and measuring has allowed us and help us plan. There are many different instruments for measuring instruments that help and give us a perspective of the issues. This is like a repository of our instruments. And we are working on measuring, but also on accountability. Let's go to the next slide. So we are in the resilience race, and this has been important because we've been putting numbers to all our projects, the projects we are working on. We are also measuring emissions. We are measuring adaptation measures. And we must remember that this goes beyond actions at a municipality, but cities with a lot of industry corridors must also consider what's going on. And Renca is 24 square kilometers, and we have to coordinate all the actions in our community. We have to coordinate with the actions of the industry. And according to the last OECD report, in adaptation, we obtained a score of A. We are very proud of the A, but it's also a huge responsibility. I want to tell you about two initiatives. Next slide, please. This is connecting climate change with vulnerability, focused on gender issues. Renca has an important number of gender vulnerable population. Renca spends over 10% of its budget in cooking, in power, in light. And when it comes to climate change, it creates a lot of vulnerability due to the expenditure, and therefore we are working on power projects, going with very specific groups to measure the impact of modifying practices and infrastructures in homes, like thermal isolation, changing electric instruments with sustainable elements, using PV panels for power generation. And this not only reduces emissions, but it also has an impact with savings. And this is evidence of different programs. And we also have programs for women, entrepreneur women who live in vulnerable contexts, and we've measured the benefit of using solar power to heat water, and we are measuring the impact. And this has been possible thanks to a public-private partnership. And this is showing that it is very effective to invest in these programs because it has an impact on different aspects like vulnerability, gender gaps, and climate change adaptation. And something that is, if we go to the next slide, please, we are going to see something that is really important in our community. This has to do with all the hills around Renca. We have over 200 hectares of hill area. I said that we have little green areas, but Renca's hills have great potential. If you've ever been to Santiago, I'm sure you visited the San Cristobal Hill that has become a park. And this is one example. It helps our commune, but it also helps all the people that live in the northeast area of Santiago. We've been planting native trees. Nature-based solutions are part of all dialogues. We've had the participation of population, and this in this project over $70 million are needed. We need good financing sources. So far, we've been using municipal funding and private funding, and we've already exercised over $5 million. We already have $5 million more ready to be used, and we are going to transform that 217 hectares into a project that will help us with the rising temperatures and decreasing carbon, and to prevent the mass loss around Renca. And this is a very important project. I was saying that, talking about the industry that are using a lot of water, but we've been working with these industries, allowing us to use the gray waters from the beverage plants to be used in the development of the Cerro Renca Park. So we have been working with the industry, and with this project, I will come to the end of my presentation. I am here for questions.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for this very interesting presentation and for considering the time limit that we have, because when at the local level, we consider everything that is happening, we have a better understanding of the reality. And what you said, we have to measure. If we don't measure these type of things, we are not able to plan, and we cannot have very specific and punctual interventions that you can carry out. And then this transition is just, in order to have a just transition, you have to measure, and you have what kind of interventions you have to implement, and what are the people that are the ones that need more help. So this is very important. Now, I'm going to pass the floor to Astrid Michel. She is the coordinator of the GIZ programs. As you know, GIZ is one of the main service providers of international cooperation that are need to the economic development in Germany, and it's devoted to education activities. It has an important presence in Latin America, and I know that they are going to be supporting projects of these kinds. Astrid, so please, you have the floor. Thank you. Hello, good morning, and would like to greet all of you from Costa Rica. I'm very honored to be here with you in this dialogue regarding actions to face climate change, tackling climate change, adaptation needs at the local level, and what is the role of national governments. And we have already said, this is federal and Germany company. in an international company for sustainable development and capacity building, and we have the commitment to work for a dignifying future in Latin America and in the Caribbean. We're present in almost all the countries. We give counseling to our partners, political partners, on climate change, but also on how to foster economy and jobs, peace, and security. Next slide, please. I don't know if you can see this, but if it's okay, I see it now. Well, Latin America and the Caribbean are a hotspot for the global climate change due to its geographical complexity and its exposure to climate change, and how difficult the social economic situation is for most of the population. Next slide, please. Extreme rainfall events are significantly increasing. They are more frequent, they are more intense. For example, we know that in Bolivia, we have the de-icing of the ice falls, and hurricanes also. Hurricanes are day after day more extreme. We have more extreme droughts. We have more floodings everywhere in coastal areas. And the figures that you see here are representative of Costa Rica. And what you see here is the impact that this has on the infrastructure, and in the end, the impact that it has on the chain of value of agriculture. Next slide, please. This climate change represents one of the greatest threats for the well-being and economy of all countries, because losses have a greatest impact on vulnerable groups such as women, children, boys, girls, and people living in poverty that normally live in rural areas. Next slide, please. What I would like to share with you today is a program that is called Scaling Up Ecosystem-Based Adaptation in Rural Areas of Latin America. This project is from the IKI initiative from the German environmental ministry, and it's been implemented in 3 countries, Costa Rica, Ecuador, and Guatemala. And the goal of these countries is to increase the resilience of the communities of vulnerable people, but also to help these ecosystems in rural areas. And we are focusing on 3 axes. One of them is governance, subnational and vertical governance, and we link it to the national government. Empowering conditions, evidence, monitoring how we link national with subnational. The other axis is implementation, the support to implement in the short term. This support is for the most vulnerable, for small producers and growers, but also the municipality levels, help them to plan in the medium and short term, and how we link it to adaptation. And this is a cross-sectional topic, and we consider gender and capacity building, and also access to funds and financing. Next slide, please. Here, what you can see is a very important cycle. The first question is, how can we empower the role of subnational governments in regards to adaptation? This role is very important in order to design policies. And what we can see here are the cycles of planning, implementing, evaluation, and learning. And let me share with you what we see in the countries we work with. And that's why why these vulnerability analyses are so important, and the tools, the data and information that subnational governments need, and also institutions in order to carry out these vulnerability analysis, but they are also helpful in order to identify the strategic options for these adaptation, and they have to go along with the national adaptation plans, and how it is important to have methodology and tools to have models of these adaptation models at the subnational level, and to be able to understand the implications that these can have for the decision-making process. In that regard, it is extremely important to reinforce the importance of a scale, spatial and temporal and time scale. What do I mean by spatial scale? When we move at the subnational level, we sometimes see that in the territory we do not have the planning tools for water basins, for example. And in order to have robust adaptation options, it's important to have this spatial scale, and then to get these involved in the municipality plans. The temporal scale is very important because sometimes agenda are only short-term agendas, but it is very relevant for adaptation to have these long-term strategies and the financing that goes along with it. Therefore, many has to do with territorial organization and to strengthen the capacities of the municipalities. And this is derived from the vulnerability analysis and the use of the correct tools. And sometimes if you know that you have a high turnover, you have to institutionalize that knowledge. The other situation is land use planning and intersectoriality. And we've heard about tourism, agriculture, livestock. It can be the production of pineapple and citrus and some other crops. And another cross-sectional topic is gender. Next slide, please, or click, because there's a video, I think. What I'm showing here is how complex this is and how important it is to strengthen these planning capacities, the use of tools, and the vulnerability analysis, and to understand how robust these vulnerability analyses are, because we need to strengthen the adaptation management and strengthen the dialogue between the different sectors. Next slide, please. And now what we have is the important role of multi-level governance. It is very relevant to improve the coordination among the different levels. What I would like to pinpoint here is that at the national level, we have different important stakeholders, and each institution has their own policy, and that's where we have to be very cross-sectional regarding adaptation. Those different stakeholders have to have a multi-actor dialogue and communication. They have to be able to make decisions, and this dialogue has to be linked to the national dialogue in order to align efforts and to align the financing sources and to link them to the national and international agendas. Next slide, please. What I am showing in this slide is how important it is to strengthen capacities to carry out the implementation. This is an example for sustainable livestock, or it's extremely important to foster implementation, to show what the options are, and also to be able to identify strategic interventions around rivers, how we protect water sources, and the access to technology, which is important as well. Next slide, please. And in this slide, I would like to emphasize that to have access to water is very important. Water security, water access is important to be able to have these access, at the subnational level. We need to improve water security. In order to do that, we have to strengthen capacity in the different institutions, in the different municipalities, and to strengthen the planning. And the next and last slide, please. It is a matter of fostering innovation. We need to identify and promote innovation. That would also mean access to technology, and to be able to identify those measures and to take those innovative measures to a greater scale. And that is my last slide, and I'll be here to answer any questions. I had one more just to close with my information. Thank you very much, Astrid. This shows how important as institutions are as yours, and they accompany the development of these projects. Everything that you said related to infrastructure is very important. Sometimes we have lack of infrastructure, and sometimes we build and we have 3 steps behind of climate event, and these make us go to the resilience topic, which is essential. Of course, that we have to work on this. There's a lack of capacity building at the municipality level, as you pointed out, and we always have a short-term mindset in Latin America because governments have cycles and terms, but this is very essential to improve and foster these, to empower subnational governments. And now I would like to give the floor to Amy Radesky. She is the director of the Director of the Office of Economic Policy and Summit Coordination in the State Department, USA, and she has a lot of experience. And you know, the America Summit last year, this year, the host the cities of the Americas, and the environmental topic has been very important. So we're very pleased to have you here, Amy, so that you can talk about this perspective and give us a vision that is out of the region. And OECD focuses on these type of debates. And you have the floor. Tienes.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate that kind introduction, and it's a real delight to be here today. I think, and thank you, and I apologize that I don't have as lovely as a background as some of our colleagues, just the boring office background, but it's a real pleasure to be here. A lot of speakers have already spoken, I think, very eloquently and convincingly on the impact of climate change in Latin America and Caribbean, and highlighted what a strong, how vulnerable this region in particular is. So I'll sort of take the time to reiterate that. I'll turn to what the United States government is doing, how strongly we recognize this as a problem, and how much we prioritize climate adaptation in our policies, particularly at the subnational level, but also at the national level. So at COP26, some of you may be aware that the U.S. government announced an initiative called Prepare. That's our whole of government effort we aim to help more than 500 million people adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change. This effort is led by the U.S. Department of State, my agency, and USAID. And we have an action plan, and we hope to use to sort of capitalize on the strengths and resources of various U.S. government agencies to implement Prepare. And so we have 3 key areas within this action plan that I'd like to highlight to you today. First, we're going to work with partners to strengthen climate information services and early warning systems to equip people and institutions with the knowledge and information they need to make sound decisions and effective actions. The United States hopes to play a leadership role in implementing the UN Secretary General's goal of bringing early warning systems to all within the next 5 years. Second, we will build capacity to mainstream adaptation into policies, programs, and budgets. This is something that I think Astrid was talking about as well, to support locally led adaptation. In these initial years, we're going to focus on food security, water, health, and infrastructure. Third, under prepare, we will work to help unlock financing to support climate adaptation action, also something I know previous speakers have mentioned. We want to work with partners to attract and access the financing to implement those adaptation programs and policies. And we want to develop a pipeline of projects, engage the private sector, and promote innovation. Now, of course, the Prepare Action Plan guides sort of our high-level efforts, but of course, as mentioned, we know that adaptation to climate change requires local solutions in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I also wanted to highlight a few examples of U.S. government programming at the that's a little bit more localized. So the first one I wanted to mention is PAC 2030. That's the U.S. Caribbean Partnership to Address the Climate Crisis. Everybody knows the Caribbean is probably within the Latin American Caribbean. It's really the one that's on the front lines of the crisis, including the global rise of sea levels that threatens low-lying islands and exacerbates storm surges associated with hurricanes. It's also, the climate crisis may also be compounding the challenges facing the Caribbean as a result of COVID-19 related economic disruptions. So we see addressing energy security and building climate resilience as a way to unlock opportunities and safeguard communities in that particular region. So for that reason, we launched PAC 2030 to elevate U.S. cooperation with those countries to support climate adaptation, strengthen energy security, build resilient critical infrastructure, and help local economies. Under the initiative, multiple U.S. government agencies are collaborating to evaluate opportunities in technical assistance and coordinate support for clean energy project development in the Caribbean. The second initiative I'd like to mention is Cities Forward initiative. I think, again, this is, I think, already been mentioned, but there's a good World Bank statistic that as much as 80% of losses caused by disasters in Latin America occur in urban areas. With cities in the Caribbean, particularly at high risk. Droughts, heat waves, tropical cyclones, and floods have severe impact on poverty, food and water security, health, and other issues. And through the Cities Forward initiative, the United States hopes to help Latin America and the Caribbean with climate adaptation. It offers peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, capacity building, and diplomatic engagement programs focused on solving urban issues, sustainability to inclusion to climate resiliency. Cities Forward works to equip local leaders throughout the region with tools and partnerships with U.S. city and private sector partners to address these shared challenges. We also help participating cities develop sustainability action plans to ignite equitable job creation and innovation investment, mitigate air, soil, and water pollution, strengthen climate resilience in the environment, and improve the health and welfare of underserved communities. And I think that actually that last point, the health and welfare of underserved communities, is probably one of the most important ones that we want to focus on. Finally, the final initiative I wanted to mention is the Greening Diplomacy Initiative, which is one of the ones that I actually, because of my job, have some direct some interaction with. We recognize that that the State Department, with all of our buildings and our huge platform overseas, we had an opportunity to use our platform to promote climate adaptation. Because wherever our embassies and consulates are located, we have firsthand local knowledge of climate impacts and adaptation dilemmas faced by the countries where we operate. So the Greening Diplomacy Initiative was created by state under the concept of eco-diplomacy. It's a term that we coined to reflect the importance of leveraging the department's facilities and operations as a strategic platform to advance the conservation of natural resources. We have 22,000 facilities, 15,000 vehicles, and 75,000 personnel in more than 190 countries. So we have a large global platform to highlight environmental technologies and best practices. We're using the latest in smart city technology to collect data from energy sensors and air quality monitors to drive decision-making within that big platform that I mentioned. Over the last 2 years, the department has modernized data collection for utilities for overseas facilities. We have a centralized automated platform that does data intake and analysis in 45 languages and 106 currencies. This data is the backbone to enable us to benchmark our operations and reduce our energy and water consumption. We're also leveraging data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Some of you may know it as NOAA. And that helps us make decisions to adapt our existing buildings and operations to withstand the harmful impacts of climate change. So those are the 3 initiatives that I wanted to mention at the local level. I also want to thank my colleague for doing, Jose Antonio, for doing a plug for the City Summit of the Americas in Denver, which we're looking forward to, and it'll be another opportunity to discuss all of these local adaptation initiatives. So just to conclude, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the OECD ministerial event in June in Costa Rica, and I'm here for questions or further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Also, a very interesting presentation with a lot of features and the programs you have. You raised a few points that are crucial also for the priorities that we will highlight after. We will do a priorities paper on all the things that have to be done in Latin America. The early warning systems is certainly one very crucial point. The knowledge sharing is another element of your programs that is very interesting, and we would like to learn a bit more on those. And the use what you have. You know, you said you have facilities all over the place, all over the world, and that can be used for this strategy and actually make informed local decisions. So very interesting point. You should also share that with us. We don't have as many facilities as the OECD all over the world, but it's, I guess, a very interesting experience. Well, now we don't have much time, but we would like to open the floor to all those participating in this event. Perdón, vuelvo a tomar el español para todos los que nos están acompañando.
And I go back to Spanish once more. I would like to invite all of you to participate. Raise your hand, pose your questions, whatever you need to share, and we'll give the opportunity to some of you, and we'll have an answer, a brief answer from some of our speakers. And if we cannot answer everything in the near future, we can have virtual meetings or email exchanges. It's someone from Mexico, Pedro Gutierrez, and I saw another hand raised, but it's no longer there. Okay, so Pedro, you have the floor. Try to be brief, please. Very precise questions. Hello, good morning. I have 2 comments that I would like to share. Well, a comment and a question. It's for Carlos Castro. I would like to know, in regards to the community where you're working in, how many light hours do you have a day, and how warm it is? Because based on the pictures that we saw and what you showed us is that you are installing solar panels. So I would like to know why you decided to use solar panels when the production, the manufacturing of the panels is polluting too, instead of using pipe heaters. You install the piping, the heater, and with the temperature that you have, I believe that you would have hot water and without polluting. So that's why I would like to know more about that project. What factors you consider in order to make the decision to use solar panels? And then another question for Astrid Michel. I have a concern. Many times when you work with communities in Mexico, mainly communities that have been previously politically manipulated, how can you get the trust of these communities and to say, okay, we are going to have a project with this community? How are we going to make the community be sure or rest assured that they are going to receive those resources and that the money is not going to be deviated to an institution or to the personnel in the government? So how do you make community to trust you and to make sure that the resources really go to where they're needed? Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is interesting. Fortunately, there are many people from OECD member countries and non-member countries, people from all over Latin America, Jamaica, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, Peru, Panama. So if you have any other questions or comments, please raise your hands. We will gather them and ask our panelists to answer. So is there any other question? I see Rodolfo raising his hand. There was another question that I saw. Astrid was talking about financing, but we have not talked about it at the local level enough. So what are the resources to close the gap of financing for adaptation measures at the local level? That is an important question. Then Rodolfo, I'm going to give you the word, but before I want to invite anyone else to, if they want to say something, please raise your hands. Rodolfo? Yes, thank you. I like the GIZ presentation. Working with a community to define their needs is a very important process. I had this experience after Katrina in New Orleans. I was a citizen representative at the Environmental Cooperation Commission of North America. We approached local communities and they were so poor in New Orleans, fishing communities as poor as Latin American communities. Very little resources to recover after the hurricane. They had lost everything, and aid depended or was based on recorded income, looking at the tax records, because they pay record server. In Latin America, not everyone pays taxes, so it's very hard, very difficult in our countries to help for local economies recovery. So do you have recommendations? Do you have methodology? How can we increase community resilience when you have no records of their income, of their property, what they had, and communities that have lost everything? Thank you very much. That is a very interesting question. So one last chance. If you have questions or comments, please go ahead. If not, I will give the word to our three guests. And I don't know if Luis wants to make another comment. So one final intervention each of the panels to answer the specific questions posed. So following the same order, Claudio, could you answer the question? Yes, going back to the question, there is a technical, academic, and political discussion regarding technologies that are being used, especially the solutions used in RENCA. We started with analysis and certification through the environmental program made a few years back. The programs that I presented developed with the energy network led by the Chilean University, very important in our country, and we also received technical support from Swiss cooperation. So this is a very interesting debate regarding efficiency, impact of the different solutions and technologies. For us, the discussion and academic participation are very important when choosing solutions. So it is very important to do this debate. I would also like to go back to the discussion of sustainability and climate change in the world, saying that impacts are local of global challenges. So there is a gap and there is a space for improving local government management in the whole world is very large. And this is where we see how important it is to form networks. Many Latin American municipalities connect with international networks outside of Latin America. So I believe that there is a space to talk about strengthening our networks because there is always a challenge to connect capacities with financing networks that become essential to face the challenge. So I am happy to continue with this discussion, and Renga is also working with the Chilean network of municipalities and we discuss all the different connections that we can establish in these spaces. Yes, Claudio, thank you very much for Renka's work. If you want to answer any of the other concerns, now I give the word to Astrid. Yes, these are very interesting questions and we have to try to find answers every day. GIZ provides technical assistance. We don't give money to any government. And what is our methodology? Well, this is very important. We are a neutral entity. Our political partners trust us because of this neutrality. Now, regarding local government and communities, we facilitate multi-actor dialogues with differing interests that must be heard, but we also work with objective criteria and science to make decisions. And this is what should be fueling public policy as well. So this is about bringing people from different sectors, people from different levels together to begin building trust among themselves, which helps find a win-win solution. I believe there was another question regarding financing and well, there are challenges and there are opportunities, and I want to be brief about this. On the one hand, we teach about the financing sources for subnational governments and institutions, but we also support in developing projects. Sometimes you cannot access the funds for different reasons, and so you have to strengthen and capacities. We also work in analyzing existing financing mechanisms to find a way of including adaptation and biodiversity and ecosystem criteria in our process and work with banks as well. And something about communities. There are offers from non-refundable funds, and we have to access information of these bids, but we have to work on different criteria like gender or innovation and access to technology, and we foster green projects. And at the same time, we accompany them with capacity building and trying to scale up these efforts. I don't know if there was another question. No, thank you very much. I have another question from Ana Aragon from Guatemala. After watching presentations yesterday and today, we realized that Latin American countries are working hard to overcome climate change challenges. These challenges are not only natural challenges, we must also face challenges brought by policy and regulatory changes in countries that will impose new standards and compliance levels of environmental protection to access the markets. So how do you think this can be addressed through climate change adaptation? Well, we are still waiting for Amy's answer. Amy, this question could be interesting to you. So from the United States perspective, how can you help countries in the region and countries facing huge development issues with all the restrictions to attain these standards? How can we help them attain these standards? I have a positive experience from Mexico when the United States was asking a series of requirements for exporting avocado to the United States, and the Mexican industry has been adapting throughout the years to reach the standard. And today they are very successful. So something similar should happen in this case. It is necessary to attain certain standards, but you need accompaniment to help countries reach this standard. So Amy, I don't know if you can help us answer this question, and then we will give 1 minute to each of you to finish our panel.
Sure. So regarding the issue of regulations and regulatory compliance, I think that's where our technical assistance really comes into play. And so we actually have a pretty robust technical assistance program, which is designed on a voluntary basis to provide that type of assistance and capacity building within national level governments to create regulatory regimes that can address a lot of these issues regarding climate adaptation. But I think as you mentioned with the avocado example, there's always a cost benefit analysis, and there's always a fine line where because we've talked about helping vulnerable groups and poverty, and so we can't have such a heavy hand on regulation that we make it impossible for businesses to operate, particularly small, medium-sized enterprises. But the main way that we, the US government, are trying to help other governments adapt, and something that we're doing in the United States as well, is through our technical assistance to governments who are trying to create those regulations. And I also just wanted to touch a little bit on the earlier question on the issue of trust within communities. And obviously, coming from the US government, it's probably not one of our greatest assets that we have always in the region, particularly with local governments. And so that is why we are also trying to do a lot more on stakeholder events, which I think Dr. Astrid mentioned as well, trying to do many more events with local stakeholders. That's why we're doing a lot more on subnational diplomacy. I mentioned the City Summit of the Americas, but that's just one example of where we're trying to do. Traditionally, we tend to talk only to our national counterparts in other countries. And there's really been a concerted effort within the US Department of State and with, I think, in diplomacy in general, to interact more with the subnational leaders who really are on the front lines of these issues. But I'll admit that that effort is probably a little bit nascent. And so that might be why we sometimes have a little bit more difficulty with the trust issue, because we just haven't interacted with local groups and local leaders as much as we probably should have. But I think there's an acknowledgement of that. And that's why you see more efforts at subnational diplomacy in the last couple of years. I hope that adequately answers the question.
Excellent, thank you very much. Luis, no sé si tengas algún comentario general sobre
Luis, would you like to give some general comments of this panel? Yes, Jose Antonio, thank you very much, and thank everyone. These interventions were very interesting, and I wanted to say something about this panel. We've been talking about the inclusion of citizens and how important it is to find the best possible solutions to the issues. This is one aspect I wanted to mention. The report also looks at a new social contract. It is important to generate these spaces so we don't have to go back and start to scratch every time. We have to leverage the knowledge and work of different organizations in the region. Something else I wanted to say about the new standards and requirements. Leo 2022 includes a chapter on international cooperation. And in this, we study some of the future changes of Bindel for the region. And we try to understand and to find those points where the different sectors will have to adapt the challenges this poses. And therefore, I am inviting you to consult this. We have a long way ahead of us, and I agree with Jose Antonio and I agree with Astrid on the importance of accompaniment to develop and to build skills and not to set hard barriers, but also to open a dialogue among the different countries in the region. They were going to post the link to the report. I think it's already in the chat. Yes, it is. This was a panel, a very important one. It was necessary to look at the local perspective because there are global debates on climate change. OECD is holding an important debate on it, but it is important to understand local realities. And this was a great contribution from this panel. I hope we are going to include all this on the paper for priorities of climate change in Latin America and the Caribbean. And some of the information presented here is very important. It is important to measure resilience, and infrastructure resilience is very important. And at the local level, this is as very specific characteristics. You have to empower subnational governments. They are key stakeholders and they are more aware of their reality. We must prevent the short-term view that is sometimes very prevailing at the local level. We have to strengthen and build capacities at the local level, early warning systems like we see with earthquakes, and having these tools at the local level is very important for any situation regarding climate change, and mainstreaming adaptation at all government levels and in the different infrastructure sectors. Also, things that we were talking about in yesterday's panel about financing at the local level, because sometimes the projects don't have the quality that a large country or a large office can do, but the municipalities sometimes don't have the capacity to do it. And the knowledge sharing is very important. Building networks like the mayor's network we heard about, like the city summit that is coming. OECD can play a role because that's our reason of being. Our reason of being is exchanging good practices, and we will be helping the region. And this idea from the Department of State of using what you have on hand, what they have at the local level, what countries have using the networks that are already there, facilities that are already there, because that can help with local information, but it can also help with local solutions. And financing, it's very clear that it is necessary to support with financing projects, and at the local level, it has specific challenges. This was a very enriching panel, and I want to thank all the panelists. I give the word to Asia. I believe where we are a few minutes above our time, but I believe that there is enough for a small break. Asia, the floor is yours.
Yes, Yes, indeed. But it was so interesting. I think I agree with you that it was very interesting discussion. And when you come up to discuss the the local level efforts, it's always very, very interesting. And Claudia's insights to that were great. But also Astrid's and Amy's sharing the projects and programs. So we really hope to seek synergies with the OECD work and develop projects where we can contribute and then work together. But so I want to thank very much for Jose Antonio for very excellent moderation, and also the speakers for their excellent presentations, and especially Astrid, who participated even on holidays. So special thanks to you that you break your holidays and came to join this event. Thank you very much. I would like to welcome you to this session, and especially those who may be the new participants joining on this session 5, biodiversity, nature-based solutions, and climate change adaptation. And this session seeks to discuss what are the potential alternatives to address climate change risks, and how sectoral policies such as forestry and agriculture could promote the use of nature-based solutions in Latin America and Caribbean. And we have Katja Karosakis, Biodiversity Program Lead at the OECD Environment, Transitions and Resilience Division, to moderate this session. And we are very happy to have you here, Katja. And please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aya, and it's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation to moderate this session on biodiversity, nature-based solutions, and climate adaptation. And just to maybe set some context, we've also just recently had successful agreement in Montreal on the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework with a number of 4 goals and 23 targets, with climate change also referred to specifically in one of the targets, and linkages overall to both mitigation and adaptation. We know, of course, that climate change is one of the 5 key pressures on global biodiversity loss, and that biodiversity can offer numerous benefits, also in terms of climate change adaptation. So these 2 areas are intricately linked. And both from the terrestrial ecosystem side, with biodiversity covering terrestrial, marine, and aquatic ecosystems. So many different opportunities to harness nature-based solutions in this context. And we've also seen further and further efforts to bring these 2 communities together. One example is the recent IPBES IPCC report, where they've looked specifically at the biodiversity climate change interlinkages, highlighting key messages there on how to harness synergies and also minimize potential trade-offs. And just again to say that, yeah, nature-based solutions in particular is an important area where there's scope for further work, for other opportunities to be harnessed. With that, I would like to pass the floor to Catherine Gamper, who will set the scene on this issue. Catherine is team lead at the Climate Adaptation, Mitigation and Resilience team in the Environment, Transitions and Resilience Division and the Environment Directorate. And with that, Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Katja. Me the rights to do so, that would be great. In the meantime, good afternoon, everybody. I hope that covers more or less the majority of the audience that is connected with us today. As Katja already said, I am heading up the OECD's work on climate change adaptation. And more specifically, we did quite a bit of work on nature-based solutions in the past couple of years, the past 4 years, I should say, and then through other work streams on adaptation, we also touched upon nature-based solutions in other streams of work. So I'll be mentioning those this afternoon. And more specifically, we also covered some countries in the region. So hopefully I'll be able to share a few relevant examples as well. Now it seems to work that I can share my screen. So there we go. I think some of these facts you've already heard about in the past 2 days or so. As you are all very well aware, your region is one of the most prone to climate-related risks. I'm not going to mention all of them, as you are all acutely aware. And we've seen, obviously, the facts are showing us that a tremendous number of the Latin American community is exposed to climate-related risks, and a number of them also highly vulnerable, which points to the fact that the distributional impacts of climate risks are very uneven, and a lot of communities may need acutely protection from climate-related risks now, and obviously also in the future. What we plotted here is to show the annual change in climate-related extreme events, comparing the period of 1980 to 2000 to the 20 years that followed thereafter. And as you can see, we plotted here just an example list of countries. The number of events are increasing and have doubled in all of these countries, and more acutely so in some of the Central American countries that we've seen that, as you know, are exposed to a plethora of risks, while the usual suspects of extreme temperature events and extreme precipitation events are sort of coupled with significant coastal risks and coastal storms, and that coupled with environmental degradation, increasing density of population in areas exposed to these risks, are obviously posing a major challenge for the region, and specifically also for quite a few of its countries, if not the majority. The ways these climate risks are unfolding in the region are also manifold. I mean, the loss of lives and livelihoods and the impacts on human health is obviously is an obvious and concerning part. And in our work in the OECD, we can see clearly that sort of the loss of life is still heavily connected with the level of income in countries. So even across the OECD, countries that are all relatively high income countries, we see that more lives are lost in lower income contexts, and we see that the economic costs, on the contrary, are higher in those countries where economic assets are more at stake. Then water scarcity will be a key concern, risks, and coupled with that, the decline in agricultural output, as well as displacement issues and pressures on ecosystem that in turn also, and this is what we'll see in our discussion on nature-based solutions now, build a natural protection and shield against many of these risks. Nature-based solutions is a bit of a catchword for a lot of things. In the OECD, we'd like to sort of use them as a broad term to speak about measures that protect, sustainably manage, or restore nature, with the goal of maintaining specific services for society, and obviously to address societal, environmental, and economic challenges. I want to highlight this because for us, the key distinction of nature-based solutions with anything else we do in nature conservancy, sort of to enhance measures to protect nature and ecosystems for the sake of protecting nature and ecosystems, whereas nature-based solutions we see as measures that really also have this component and objective of giving us another service on top of that, from which we as a society or in our economic activities benefit on top of that. But again, it's not a standard as such that we put up there, but rather just a clarification of what we mean when we refer to nature-based solutions. And again, this could differ when other international organizations provide definitions, such as the European Union, such as the IUCN, to which our definition is a very close one, as well as when countries speak to nature-based solutions. So one has to be careful to what we refer when we speak of nature-based solutions. To make this a little bit more tangible, I put up this graph here that shows sort of the many different nature-based solutions you could have, for example, now in terrestrial ecosystems and in water-based ecosystems. Here, for example, you can see a forest landscape restoration, for example, serves to reduce flood impacts, but also helps us stabilize slopes or provide clean water as a further co-benefit behind sort of the immediate adaptation objectives that we're pursuing. Underneath, you see a coastal protection and restoration example that helps us sort of by restoring reefs. It helps us protect the coasts and the coastal habitats. So at the same time, we're hopefully supporting biodiversity goals and benefits while also helping increasing our resilience to coastal risks through natural protection. Nature-based solutions, for those that advocate in favor of them, are often seen as being more cost-effective as compared to some gray infrastructure measures that you can use to reduce climate risks. As just indicated, they provide multiple co-benefits beyond the climate adaptation benefits they can produce. Mitigation benefits, for example, if we restore mangroves, we have the benefits of capturing CO2 in mangroves, especially if they're well maintained. We can also restore coastal habitats in them and provide a cleaning water mechanism, as just said. So when we speak about NBS, we tend to highlight these co-benefits a lot and foster these co-benefits and see them not so much as a replacement to grey infrastructure, but also as a complement. And in much of the work we do, we show just how we could integrate nature-based solutions in traditional infrastructure planning and implementation processes. Another benefit that is often highlighted by the climate community is their flexibility for themselves responding to the impact of climate change. Because they tend to have the capacity to evolve and adapt to when the climate is getting warmer or wetter. And this is typically a constraint of grey infrastructure in general. Although nature-based solutions may not be appropriate in all contexts, we see in our work that they are getting frequently overlooked as a sort of a low-hanging fruit and perhaps a more cost-effective solution. We see in our work, and you in yours as well, and I guess that was highlighted already earlier by colleagues, is that the support for nature-based solutions has increased quite significantly in the past few years. Katia just highlighted the IBS, but there's also the COP27 that quite prominently initiated a number of activities by putting nature-based solutions as one of their key priorities. And ACT is one of these initiatives that tries at a very high level to coordinate a significant number of efforts, even though voluntary, but nonetheless already quite significant by a number of countries, which have been followed and complemented at the COP as well through the announcement of significant national programs such as the Biden-Harris administration or roadmap, they call it, for nature-based solutions, which are aiming to align 25 billion of infrastructure and climate funding that is being made available with nature-based solutions. And that obviously dates back to earlier commitments at the COP25 already. And besides what you see here on the right-hand side, the integration of nature-based solutions in national adaptation strategies and plans, we can also see them highlighted in NDCs, such as in the region in Chile, Colombia, or Mexico's NDC, where they are both highlighted as measures to tackle climate from the mitigation side as well as from the adaptation side. Specifically in the region, obviously we saw the impacts that we expect from and that we've already observed from climate change in the region. So nature-based solutions offer an interesting solution to deliver sort of critical protection for the LAC population sort of throughout the region. We see they're increasing, and from our colleague from the WRI, we will hopefully see a little bit more detail on just how this is the case in the region. And we can also highlight a number of good practices in our work on scaling up nature-based solutions for water-related climate risks that you can see here. We looked specifically at the case of Mexico, where you can see that nature-based solutions are very much across governmental efforts. So they're looked at by agencies, not just from the environment, but also Senabred, the civil protection, as well as agriculture. So it's very nice to see that they're sort of finding their way in all relevant programs across the administration. They're highlighted in the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, and there's quite a number of funding mechanisms that fund nature-based solutions as well. We see quite a bit of private sector engagement, or we saw that in Mexico quite prominently, more than in other OECD countries, where, for example, an insurance and a reef insurance program is reapping the benefits for restoring coasts. Nevertheless, as much as I'm making the case here for nature-based solutions, we see them implemented on a relatively small scale, very often as lighthouse projects and on an ad hoc basis. And rarely, do programs come to the fore that I just mentioned in the US or in other OECD countries, such as in Germany as well. And we see the reasons behind it being hugely a lack of awareness among the stakeholders that could actually use them. Also, given their multiple co-benefits, there's little awareness about that. There's a relatively scattered funding landscape from there. So it's rare that you find sort of one go-to place to invest in nature-based solutions. Again, there's notable exceptions and programs that show a little bit the lead into a different direction, such as Germany's natural protection program at the moment, or the Biden-Harris roadmap that I just mentioned. There's gaps in technical capacity, especially because they're often conceived and implemented at the local level. And I can see you, Katja, and there's obstacles in demonstrating the benefits of their performance over time, which obviously has been well established for grey infrastructure. So if you look into the OECD's publication, you will see quite a host of recommendations that hopefully help countries scale nature-based solutions up in the future. And I'm hoping we will learn of sort of concrete examples in this discussion now as well. Thanks, Katja, for your patience.
I'm very pleased now to welcome the panelists who will be speaking. We have 3 speakers. We have Mr. Luis Zambrano Gonzalez, who's a researcher at the Institute of Biology at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, and sorry for my pronunciation. I'm also very happy to introduce Ms. Suzanne Osmet, who's a senior associate on natural infrastructure at the World Resources Institute. Hello. And finally, also Ms. Maria Fernanda Velez, who's advisor to the Office of International Affairs at the Ministry of Environment in Colombia. So with that, I would like to start with Mr. Luis Zambrano Gonzalez. And Mr. Gonzalez, could you please share with us your perceptions of climate change adaptation and biodiversity linkages, as well as examples from your country? And just to remind speakers that there are about 7 minutes, so that to allow some time for questions and answers as well, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. I will speak in Spanish from here because I only have 7 minutes. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for having invited me to this session. And I wanted to begin by showing this slide to remember what we talk about when we talk about nature-based solutions and ecosystems. Basically, what we're talking about is that we have biodiversity that includes mushrooms, insects, and some other organisms or microorganisms that we don't take into account, but they are essential. They are part of pollination. We have different kinds of plants, birds, mammals, reptiles, and so on. So if you put all that together, we have an ecosystem, and the ecosystems interact with the environment, with the sun, with the temperature, water, and so on. And that the flow that this interaction causes is what we call an ecosystem service, because it provides us with a benefit. And we have taken advantage of that since the humankind has existed, and that gives us the opportunity to have a good quality of life. It's evident that in Latin America, we are rich regarding biodiversity. We can also talk about Brazil that have a high biodiversity. And in Mexico, we always start our dissertations saying that Mexico has a very high biodiversity. We have many different ecosystems that include a high biodiversity, and many cultures have adapted to this biodiversity. And in Mexico, we have very diverse cultures. We have the Mayan and the Purépechas and so on. Next slide, please. However, as we have mentioned so far, or many of my colleagues have already pointed out, that we are approaching climate change. We are already experiencing climate change, and I'm going to provide you with two very clear examples. I work in Mexico City, and it's been said that we are going to be droughts in the Valley of Mexico for 3 months, and that we've been experiencing this for the last 3 years. This news was released 3 days ago, and what you can see on this slide is the average millimeters of rainfall per year in Mexico City. And we've seen the reduction of rainfall in Mexico City, and we shelter more than 20 million people. And back in 1985, when I was in high school, we had more than 800 millimeters of rainfall a year, and then 900, and nowadays in average is less than 600. So this is one of the most important problems that we are facing. How can we face this challenge? Well, traditionally, we've been doing it with infrastructure that leads to bigger problems. Then what we need is to change this mindset, this philosophy. Next slide, please. How have we been facing this challenge? Let me give you there two simple examples. First, it's a high bridge that was built on Xochimilco, that is one of the last wetlands that we have in Mexico City. This is a bridge to reduce the traffic of cars. And with that, it is so that we're improving the climate change, and it's been, and also that I guess you've heard about the Mayan train, that I believe that instead of improving this region, I believe that is going to have a negative impact on all this region, from the Yucatan Peninsula to the Amazonian region, from Venezuela up to Brazil. Why? Because this is a huge biodiversity corridor. So these are the type of projects that we are seeing nowadays that are believed to help in regards to climate change. But if we keep doing this, we're going to keep suffering. Next slide, please. We create these projects basically due to these type of things. We have the ODCs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, that are a great advance in terms of understanding and reduce the changes of climate change based on MBSs. But we consider, or when we try to isolate all these components, everything can be considered among the SDGs. We have seen this in this high bridge that was built on top of the wetland and the Mayan train, but we can have so many other examples. Let's see the plant, the Tesla plant that is going to be built in Nuevo León. They want to build electrical cars in an area where there's no water. And it might be thought, okay, that is going to reduce the effects of CO2, but then you have to transfer water from the Pánuco River to Monterrey in order to provide water to this plant. So in the end, we are not understanding how this mechanism works.
Formas para tratar de entender esto.
One of the ways to understand this is what a Stockholm Resilience Center did recently. Next slide, please. In order to try to understand somehow what we can do, thank you, what we can do in order to start making decisions, a Stockholm Decision Center developed or created this pyramid, this pyramid of sustainable development goals. And at the base, we have the biosphere, then we have the society, and at the end, we have the economy. And if all the decision-making process was made in this, considering this pyramid, first biosphere, society, and economy, we could start understanding NBSs. The greatest problem that we have is that we normally do the opposite. First, we think about economy. Economy is the foundation to solve social problems. And in the end, that is going to have a negative impact on ecology. We've seen that what we've done traditionally hasn't worked. And all the projects that we have are like that. First, we think about the economy, and that is supposed, or we hope that this is going to solve the environmental problem or to help society. And we cannot continue having that mindset, because we are going to keep doing what we've been done for the last 100 years. And this is what has led us to this climate change crisis. And I'll give you two more examples in the last slide that I have. Next slide, please. On the left, you can see tweet from the Environment Ministry of the Mexico City. It's a capital program and a historical investment of more than 1,000 million pesos for soil preservation. Once again, we're able to increase the cempasúchil production. And this is what is thought that improves the environment situation. So we have this huge production of flowers. These are the Day of the Dead flowers. And on the one hand, the only thing that we achieve is to destroy soil, and soil is very necessary and useful for water absorption in Mexico. And they also polluted with pesticides and herbicides this region. And they also decreased the price of the flowers. So growers had to go to the streets to sell their own flowers. So this is not a way to improve. I mean, this is not the solution to have nature-based solutions. On the contrary, and I will finish with this, I'm so sorry, I know that I'm above my time. What it is being done in Xochimilco, they are recovering the vision that they had regarding the chinampas. And this has worked for the last 1,500 years in Mexico. That is, this type of production uses nature as an ally. We are not fighting against the nature. They don't use herbicides or pesticides. They just work with their hands, and this type of work does not require a lot of technology. They use very simple technology, and this worked very well. If the whole Xochimilco would devote 20% of what their production to feed Mexico City, and that's a lot if we consider that we are more than 20 people in Mexico City. So these are the type of examples that we have to consider, and these are the things that work in order to reduce our vulnerability before climate change and the climate crisis. Thank you very much, and that's all my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm open to any comment or questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez, for that. And also really interesting to see how quickly, I mean, the short time periods within which you can see such dramatic changes, similar to a slide that Catherine had showed. And of course, very interesting to see also the specific examples of good practices and not so good practices. With that, I'd like to invite Ms. Suzanne Osmed from WRI to provide remarks in this context as well, please.
Hi, thank you, Katya. And I'm sharing my screen now. I hope everyone can see. Yeah, okay, great. All right, well, yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I've really enjoyed the presentations in this session so far, and they've also saved me a little bit of time, so hopefully I can actually stick to my 7 minutes or less. I'd like to start by just reiterating some of the points that Catherine laid out so clearly, which is that, you know, our response to climate risk often takes the view of infrastructure, and especially built infrastructure. But unfortunately, that's missing opportunities to address some of the root causes of climate risk, which are originating in the watersheds and ecosystems that our infrastructure is embedded within. So integrating nature-based solutions into these engineered systems actually represents a huge opportunity to boost the performance of our infrastructure systems, to yes, to be cost effective and to also boost climate resilience. And so what I want to talk to you about today is how the region is already starting to use nature-based solutions to address climate risk within infrastructure systems, particularly around water, transport, energy, and urban development. Let's see, I hope you're seeing my slides clearly. I don't know why there's a bar at the top and if there's anything I can do about that. But anyway, okay, so at the World Resources Institute where I work, we've been keeping tabs on nature-based solution projects, specifically on climate resilience from around the world. And I'm going to present some results today from the inventory we've done in Latin America and the Caribbean. We've identified about 150 projects in the region that are using nature-based solutions to address climate risk. And again, the sectors that I mentioned, water, energy, transport, and urban development. So this does not include like nature-based solutions for carbon sequestration or environmental biodiversity projects more broadly. It's a pretty narrow set of projects here. But this map presents the heat map for where we found the projects. And as you can see, there's quite a few in Mexico, but also other countries as well. In fact, there's a pretty broad use of nature-based solutions, at least one project in almost every country. This table here summarizes some of the common types of nature-based solutions that are being applied, as well as some of the common benefits that these projects are aiming to achieve. And so what you can see here is that many of the projects are dealing with forests or agroforestry systems to address water quantity and water quality challenges, but there's actually a pretty broad range of diversity for what these projects are attempting to achieve. And one of the powers of nature-based solutions is the ability to achieve multiple benefits simultaneously. So we also looked into what co-benefits these types of projects were trying to achieve. As many as 70 of these projects are focused on improving livelihoods. 30 of them are trying to create actual job opportunities for local communities. Many of the projects are designed to sequester carbon and achieve biodiversity benefits at the same time. So I'll tell you also about who's leading these projects. Government and civil society spearhead most of the nature-based solution projects, with each stakeholder group leading about 40% of the projects we identified. In terms of broad government participation, this chart can show you that 94% of the projects we found have some form of government participation, either national, local, or both. But the civil society participation in the region and leadership in the region on nature-based solutions is what we've actually found that unique compared to other regions. And I do think that that's an important finding. These civil society groups are doing a tremendous job of working with communities to understand how they can benefit from nature-based solutions. And finding ways to then connect back to some of the infrastructure objectives that are maybe national priorities, for example. In terms of funding sources for nature-based solutions, you know, over 3/4 of these projects are heavily dependent on grants, which is, of course, an important source of funding for projects like these that are delivering public goods, but it also may limit the financial security over time. We also found that within these projects, over half of them are still within the pilot phase or even just in project preparation. Many of these projects are struggling to reach their intended scale of operation to achieve the benefits that they're seeking. And one common reason for this is obviously lack of sufficient funding. So we're very interested in seeing that there is some innovation in tapping into private sector or development finance to make these projects move forward. And also you'll see tax revenue and utility rates as ways that some of these nature-based solutions are starting to secure cash flows to pay for their work. What's it going to take to channel investment into these projects and to similar projects? We asked the project developers and, you know, formulated our own opinions. And I just want to highlight a couple of these. First is we need policy reform. I think that Catherine might have nodded towards one law in the region that's really demonstrating leadership, which is back in 2016, Peruvian lawmakers passed the sanitation sector reform law, and it actually requires water utilities to set aside funding, to set aside revenue from raised through tariffs to pay for watershed conservation and adaptation. And that's actually an example, a global leadership example. There's still some kinks to work out in terms of how these funds can be dispersed to communities, but it's a very encouraging example, and one that perhaps other countries might like to follow suit. Second, we need financial innovation. I just mentioned that a little bit. One example also that Catherine mentioned is in Quintana Roo, Mexico. The government created a trust fund that raises funds through a tax on hotels to fund the sustainable management of coral reefs, which are so important for tourism, but also for coastal protection. A problem that they face is they don't always have enough funds on hand to implement massive restoration efforts after a big disaster. And so what's interesting is they actually took out an insurance policy on their coral reef, and that allows them, after a big hurricane comes through, to get a payout from their insurance policy. And that was actually tested in 2020. They received $850,000 to do restoration work after the hurricane. And so that's helping them build resilience to climate change. So it's a really interesting example. And there are a few other bright spots of innovation in the region as well. Finally, we need to integrate nature-based solutions into national level priorities and planning. The Inter-American Development Bank has been a champion of this. They have started a new effort to integrate natural capital into their country strategies with clients. These country strategies are the documents that guide investments over 5 years or so at a time. And IDB's already increased the focus on natural capital in 6 country strategies, hoping to do more. I actually think I also wanted to mention the importance of monitoring and evaluation. There's a lack of data coming from these projects in terms of the performance that's necessary to inspire investment. And so we need to work on that. We need to work on ensuring that these projects are not just taking place on the ground, but are also monitoring what the results are and reporting that, sharing that. And the more that we can share that type of data, the better positioned we'll be to scale up across the region. So with that, I'll just sum up to say there is a lot of innovation and activity on nature-based solutions in the region. It's extremely encouraging, and we need to implement more supportive measures to make sure that these projects and other projects like them can achieve the scale that they're intending to. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And I think so much of what you said resonates to me, at least. I mean, we've also done work on looking at how to scale up finance for marine protected areas. And I see so many common issues on something that's obviously related, but different, but it's the same principles, the same issues, etc. I fully agree on the monitoring and evaluation, and also very happy to see that you are creating an inventory. I hope it's also publicly available. I don't know. I know I have some questions, but I'm just saying that now because I hope other people, as they're listening to these presentations, are noting down questions, because after the third presentation, there'll be time for question and answer. So please make sure that if you have questions, clarification, or bigger issues, please feel free to jot them down towards the end. With that, I would very much like to now welcome our final speaker, Ms. Maria Fernanda Velez, from the Ministry of Environment in Colombia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers for this invitation, and I greet all participants. Suzanne was talking about the importance of national strategies, and following up on that, I want to say that Colombia, within the National Development Plan, is addressing the challenges regarding the reduction of disaster risk, the loss of biodiversity, and mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Our National Development plan is at the core of the discussion, putting nature in the center of everything and putting the populations in our territory who are the main stewards of these resources and ecosystems at the center of the discussion. But we also have to mention productive sectors who are also stakeholders and can help us attain our environmental objectives. In Colombia, 34% of the territory is under some type of conservation, but we have big issues that are posing a risk to all these protected areas and ecology. These areas are key points housing life-sustaining processes, and nature-based solutions must have a community focus, because communities can help attain the objective of reducing deforestation, but at the same time helping communities and sectors through agreements to preserve ecosystems and maintain the communities with alternative production, means of production. Regarding institutional climate architecture, the National Development Plan and different documents that stem from this plan include nature-based solutions to help reduce vulnerability and build capacities. And I have 3 specific cases. In agriculture, it is important to include landscape because many relevant environmental services such as pollination, water, and important fishing habitats, erosion control, and others are directly related to the status of conservation and resilience of ecosystems. Another sector is the mining and energy sector, where we are working on the preservation of basins and that try to obtain benefits from protecting areas and reducing vulnerability through the protection of areas that offer ecosystem services for the development of economic activities and the development of communities sitting in the area of influence of different productive projects. Finally, regarding tourism, industry, and trade, strategic ecosystems and protected areas are identified as important areas for nature-based activities. So regarding the management of demand and offer of resources, we are working in developing guidelines for the reduction of climate risks focused on touristic activities that take place in strategic ecosystems in the country. Now, regarding climate change and biodiversity, we acknowledge the importance of understanding and considering a reconfiguration ecosystems due to climate pattern changes. Consider impact of climate-dependent species and the promotion of actions to reduce ecosystem vulnerabilities to climate change. In this sense, nature-based solutions will ensure resilient ecosystems that can withstand adverse conditions. It is also key to identify strategic ecosystems where it is a priority to implement risk reduction measures based specifically on these systems. Therefore, measures must be an answer to decrease certain threats, but must also contribute in solving other issues, as my other colleagues have already mentioned. Therefore, there is a proposal to work on restoration and other measures, including productive systems. These are just a few ideas around the topic of this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Velez, for those very interesting remarks. And I have to say also, it's very nice to hear that issues including nature-based solutions are in your national development plans. I think that's a very important first step. We had done some work a couple of years ago at the OECD looking at the extent to which there was integration of climate, biodiversity, and food objectives across multiple different plans at the domestic level. And we found that you'd see differences across countries, like some were well reflected, others weren't. Some even had specific targets. So as you could have a sort of a baseline and you could then monitor and say, well, yes, we achieved our objectives or not. So it's very interesting to see that. So we've come now to the conclusion of our three speakers and our introductory speaker, Catherine. And we have a number of participants with us today. Please feel free to raise your hands. I will do my best to see who's doing this, and I will open the floor for discussion. I see the first question here, Cynthia Cordoba. I cannot see the last of the name, but CRI. Would you like to take the floor, please?
Good morning, good afternoon. Greetings to you all. I have mostly comments. First, regarding Luis's presentation, I have a few questions about the case of flower growing, because I believe that a strong analysis and in detail analysis was needed regarding externalities of the project. A detailed cost-benefit analysis could have helped, and if those externalities had been identified, the project probably would not have taken place. This is a comment and an observation regarding the presentation. Now, regarding metrics that Katia was mentioning, it is essential to have information, as we have been saying throughout this event. In Costa Rica, we have a National Council of Environmental Basins in charge of the development of environmental basins in the accounts, and we are accounts in the system. We are developing some other accounts for ecosystem services, and this is important because when you're making decisions, you need to be aware of the impact and the contribution of instruments with metrics to allow you to implement actions for adaptation, and it also helps you make better decisions, and you can start working with the national budget to allocate resources. So it is very important to develop macroeconomic information that will contribute to decision-making and contribute to the development of nature-based solutions.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. There was a comment, I guess, addressed to Luis, but Luis, would you like to comment on that? Would you like to respond at all? Just the opportunity if you wish to do so.
Yeah, sí.
Yes.
Yes. Obviously, there was not a cost-benefit analysis as has done with the Mayan train, and it is known if the cost analysis was being done, the bridge, as Chimilco mentioned, would not have been built, or the Mayan train, or even this case that I was presented and that you mentioned, and that is exactly what we want. But this cost-benefit analysis comes after understanding how nature works to understand externalities. Cynthia is completely right. This has not been done. If it was done, it was not taken into account. But let's not think about cost benefit at the beginning. Let's think about cost benefit after you understand how the ecosystem works. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Luis. I don't see any hands raised, so I'm going to just like what the recent interaction just now made me also think about. I mean, of course, cost benefit analysis is, at least in my opinion, like an ideal, like it's where we would like to go. It is obviously time intensive and a costly process, but there's also environmental impact assessments that are normally required through national laws, etc. So I mean, I just wonder if that's another entry point, lower cost, sort of lower intensive entry point to fielding these types of projects, and something that needs to be taken before in order to go ahead with a project. Would anyone like to raise any other questions? I can ask a question to Suzanne. I mean, I have one if that's all right, but I also want to make sure that I'm going to go ahead, Suzanne, if that's all right. I'm just curious with the inventory, you said you have a narrow definition of NBS. I think you said you had 150 projects there. I was just curious, why is that the case? Is that just because you had to prioritize somewhere on like, you know, the inventory, that if you had a broader definition, it would just be so many projects and you just need to start one by one? I was just curious the rationale behind that.
That's a good question. I think we took a narrow definition because we were narrowly interested in understanding where the infrastructure development process was perhaps being disrupted or supplemented by the inclusion of nature-based solutions, because there's a huge scale pathway there. If it was routine to consider nature-based solutions in infrastructure investment projects, we could start channeling significantly more funding to these types of strategies than if we were to rely on conservation funds alone. So we were really interested to understand where are those types of models emerging, where nature-based solutions can complement or even sometimes supplement infrastructure. And so we were looking at the water, urban development, transport, and energy sectors specifically. Other applications of nature-based solutions are also tremendously interesting, but it's not something that we've been collecting data on.
Okay.
Yes.
I hope you do in the future, but anyway. And I see a flag from Rodolfo Lacey. Hello, Rodolfo, please take the floor.
Yeah, sorry. This is a question for Susan too, but for all of you, because now that we have new goals and targets from the Kunming and Montreal, it's not an agreement, but it's the decision of the COP15. What is the effect of these decisions in the taxonomy of nature-based solutions? Because I suppose that there are more attributes that these nature-based solutions must have in order to be considered as nature-based solutions. I don't know if you have an answer, or if you know if someone is updating the taxonomies of nature-based solutions or working on that.
What a good question. And I definitely rely on the other panelists to answer that. I haven't looked into it in detail. I know that IUCN, as managing what they call the nature-based solutions gold standard, has like a multi-page document with listing out the attributes that are necessary, taking consideration of both the need to have a specific investment objective for society, as well as to ensure that environmental assets are actually being improved, and that this is not sort of creating perverse incentive, but it's truly nature positive. So, you know, from my perspective, IUCN has that and is probably updating that, but I haven't been following it closely. Maybe Catherine has.
No, I haven't either, but Rodolfo, this is an extremely important question, and it's an extremely important answer for us experts to have, because we run into problems when we work with countries that there is still a huge confusion of what nature-based solutions are. And very often we spend sometimes, you know, halfway through our projects talking in parallel, and as government officials change, even those come in with a completely different mindset. Making, for example, the confusion with what is green infrastructure, or what are green measures, or what are infrastructure slash nature-based solutions measures, and the distinction between the two often completely mixed up, and they're different concepts. And it does not help that, for example, the European Commission has issued a definition where they see nature of what we have discussed today. I think it was a bit of a common flavor of what we gave as nature-based solutions. They defined that as green infrastructure, and that, you know, increases the confusion endlessly. So we were, sometimes even when we speak with Katja in our work, we were thinking to ourselves, you know, whether this is an effort that will come from somewhere and helps us solve this conundrum, or whether it is worth for OECD to weigh in on this. But given that there is this good definition of IUCN, we were thus far very reluctant to throw in yet another confusion to the plethora of definitions there are. So that's a very, very good question. But Katja, maybe you can enlighten.
Well, I'm under the impression that under the United Nations Environment Assembly, they reached agreement. So it's a more, I mean, it's not IUCN, it's not one organization or another. It's a UN, you know, international agreement on a definition on nature-based solutions, and so I think that has certainly helped to provide some clarity across all these other definitions that were emerging, and that I think the UNEA has obviously built on, but that it has enabled harmonization. And because it's under the umbrella of the United Nations, I mean, it's a global or next to global, you know. So I think that issue has been resolved in a sense. I don't see any questions. So with that, if Aya is available, maybe I will pass the floor back to Aya for the closing remarks or to manage the rest of the meeting. Thank you so much for that. And thank you again to the 4 speakers. I thought it was extremely interesting, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Katja, and thank you very much for your excellent moderation of this session, and all the speakers for their interesting presentations. So this is really such an important topic for the climate change adaptation in Latin America. So we will come back to possibly to do some work in this area. So now we are ready to start the closing session of this third regional policy dialogue. I would like to invite Eduard Gonzalez, Minister Counselor from the Colombian Embassy, to serve as a moderator. Thank you very much, Eduard, that you jumped in to replace the Ambassador Medina, who had a very urgent call to take. So I pass the floor to you to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Elja. The Ambassador of Colombia to the OECD, Mr. Nicolás Medina, for scheduling reasons, cannot be with us. So please allow myself, on behalf of the co-chairmanship exercised by Colombia for the third cycle of the OECD Regional Program for Latin America and the Caribbean, to thank the speakers for their very interesting presentations, as well as the participants for their active contributions. The region is highly vulnerable to extreme climate-related weather events, and this is why the third regional policy dialogue on environmental sustainability addressed these topics during the last 2 days. In a previous conclusion, environmental effects continue, and it is crucial that LAC countries enhances cooperation aiming to increase resilience and provide effective solutions for these global and regional challenges. Now I invite Mrs. John Tyndall, OECD Environmental Director, to provide her closing remarks. Mrs. Tyndall, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much, and colleagues, good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to join you all today for the conclusion of the third OECD Latin American and Caribbean Regional Policy Dialogue on Environmental Sustainability. Bit of a mouthful there. It is great to see the critical topic of climate change adaptation getting such attention and bringing us all together, even if it's not possible for us all to be in person together on this occasion. Over the course of the last 2 days, I understand you've explored and confirmed the potentially disastrous consequences of climate change in LAC countries, a region that we well know is increasingly exposed to climate risks. At the same time, it is encouraging to hear of your success in focusing attention on viable solutions to strengthen the region's adaptation capacity. So thank you, therefore, for the opportunity for me to share a few concluding reflections. National adaptation plans remain the key tool for countries to manage climate risks in a coordinated and proactive manner. They are useful, cost-efficient ways to develop and implement adaptation policy instruments and allow for action at a local level. We know this is essential because the impacts of climate change are, of course, highly localized and unevenly distributed. Effective climate adaptation action must be underpinned by the availability of sufficient funding. And many Latin American and Caribbean countries have targets in their NDCs and their NAPs that are conditional on financial support from international sources. Well, we know the money is there in the global financial system, but we need to work on speeding up its disbursement and ensuring its effectiveness in achieving results. We also need to better understand biodiversity's essential, its critical role in adapting to the impacts of climate change. It's interesting that nature-based solutions are receiving growing attention from the international community, and it's a really good thing to see, but they remain a relatively new policy tool. Work the OECD has done has shown that implementing nature-based solutions, or NBS, remains piecemeal, and that more needs to be done to create an enabling environment conducive to NBS investment. And finally, we should continue to strive for climate policies to be inclusive. Vulnerable communities are often more severely impacted by climate-related events, and countries need to introduce responsive climate policy frameworks to minimize the impact on those most vulnerable. Now, one of the aims of this dialogue was to discuss how the OECD can support LAC countries in their climate resilience efforts. So it's great that you've carved out 3 main areas of cooperation and discussed those. And just to summarize, first, drawing on the OECD long-standing experience in environment and climate-related indicators, we can provide reliable data to carry out evidence-based research and support effective policy choices. The OECD has developed a comprehensive and harmonized data set on climate-related hazards. This is going to be presented in an OECD report on environment at a glance, focusing on climate change and the Latin American and Caribbean region. Second, we stand ready to provide country-specific analysis, guidance, and recommendations to support policy design and implementation. This can be done through the exchange of knowledge on adaptation, built through the OECD's Task Force on Climate Change Adaptation. Knowledge exchange will be continued as part of the OECD Working Party on Climate Change. And specific analysis may also focus on gender-sensitive environmental policy. And that's already being done for Greece with the report that was called Empowering Women in the Transition Towards Green Growth. Third, and finally, the OECD can support strengthening financial mechanisms to underpin adaptation action and manage the financial consequences of extreme events. We did a recent framing paper on climate resilient investment, and that emphasizes the need to ensure that all investment decisions are conducive to strengthening resilience. And we're also looking at the financial management of losses and damages. Our report, Financial Resilience to Climate Impacts, a framework for governments to manage the risks of losses and damages. We're very good at these long titles. But that report synthesizes international best practices for progressing this agenda. I really look forward to seeing how these collaboration avenues could be taken up in the future. I also look forward to the first OECD LAC Ministerial on Environmental Sustainability to be held in Costa Rica later this year. So thank you all very much for your active participation in this dialogue. I hope the OECD LAC regional policy dialogues on environmental sustainability could become regular, useful forums for peer learning, for exchange of information and best practices on the green transition in the Latin American and Caribbean region. I thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon.
Thanks, Mrs. Tyndall. They have been 2 days of productive sessions, and as well as you, we highlight the importance of the environmental component in the design and implementation of effective public policies and innovative solutions. This dialogue also contributes to integrate the environmental priority with the LAC regional program pillars such as productivity, social inclusion, and governance. In effect, the program seeks to highlight the interlinkages among these priorities and creating synergies within its different activities. Now I pass the floor to Mr. Alexandro Patiño Cruz, OECD Deputy Permanent Representative of Costa Rica, for his closing remarks. Mr. Patiño, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Voy a tomar ventaja de la interpretación para.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in
español.
Spanish and use the interpreting services.
Perdón, es que estaba oyendo la interpretación. Ahora sí. En primer lugar, muchas gracias por este espacio.
First of all, I'm honored to be here. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to address you to close this dialogue. I would like to congratulate OCDE for holding this third regional dialogue. OECD is a strategic partner for the Latin American and Caribbean region to lead us to a sustainable development, sustainable and inclusive development. This has been a very valuable opportunity to have a better understanding of the options and mechanisms that we can adopt and implement in the Latin American and Caribbean region to foster our adaptation to climate change and mitigation. To fight against climate change is one of the greatest challenges that we currently face. Our countries are more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And this is due to the limited capacity to face these challenges. Climate change requires from us an immediate action as a region, and we have to be ready to face these challenges. I have to point out how important it is this fight against climate change, and we have to do this collectively and in a coordinated manner in the whole region in order to reach agreements and to have a positive and long-lasting effect for the benefit of the present and future generations. We wouldn't like to miss this opportunity to pinpoint the efforts that are done by all countries and Costa Rica to make progress in the green agenda. And within the framework of the leadership of our country, I would like to invite all of you on behalf of my country for the next environmental ministerial meeting that we'll have, that is part of the Latin American and Caribbean program of the OECD. This ministerial meeting is going to be held in Costa Rica in the month of October, and hopefully it'll be a great platform so that we continue making progress in these joint and coordinated efforts. I would like to emphasize that coordination is essential because this ministerial meeting is an opportunity to get in touch with different regional initiatives such as the Americas Summit in Los Angeles and some others that are going to happen throughout the 2023, like European Union and CELAC that is going to happen in Brussels, Environmental Summit that is going also to be held in Costa Rica, and the Sustainable Development of OAS that is also going to be held this year. The ministerial meeting that is going to be held in Costa Rica is not an isolated effort. It's a contribution to the regional and global leadership that looks for environmental resilience that allows us to have sustainable economic development that is beneficial for everybody. And thank you very much to everybody. And we hope everybody here in Costa Rica for our ministerial meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patiño. We look forward for this ministerial on environment sustainability in Costa Rica later this year. Once again, many thanks to the panelists and the attendees. This event would have not been a success without your important inputs. Finally, we encourage you all to continue participating actively in the dialogues and events related to the OECD's regional program for Latin America and the Caribbean. And Elja, we will take over to you to conclude this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalez. So, and thank you all the participants. And we have taken a note on all the discussion, and we will be providing a report which is called Report on Resilience and Climate Resilience and Neutrality Priorities. And we hope that we will be able to develop some specific projects where we could then work together. And finally, I would like to thank you for all the organization team. We have a joint team of Environment Directorate and Global Relations and Cooperation Directorate, who is organizing this event. And so we are very thankful for all the hard work that the team has been doing. I don't mention all the names because we are quite many anyway behind this, but I would like to thank all of them. And now it's time to close the meeting, and I hope you will have a nice afternoon and nice evening and nice weekend after this, our interesting event. Thank you very much.